Hi, my name is Abby Chan, and I'm the Registered Dietitian and co-owner of Evolve Flagstaff. Today we're going to be discussing Meal Prep 101, the basics of how to plan it, how to do it, and how to live healthier and save a little bit more money. Let's first talk about what meal prepping is. So if you scrolled through your Instagram recently or your Pinterest, you've probably seen some really beautifully prepped meals in great little containers, all organized and ready for the week. But if you've ever tried to do this on your own, sometimes it doesn't really work out so well. I find that most of my clients either have an all or nothing approach to meal prepping because it does take a good chunk of time. And if someone doesn't have that 2 to 3 hours to dedicate to prepping for their entire week, a lot of times they just don't prep at all. So I want to discuss today of how we can kind of create some levels of meal prepping so that you can go from either maybe just prepping one meal a day to planning a little bit more for your whole week. So let's talk about the different ways that we can actually think about meal prepping. So meal prepping, you can make full make-ahead meals, which is cooking an entire meal such as like a lasagna or a casserole and then storing it in your fridge for later that week. Another way of thinking about meal prepping is batch cooking or freezing. So this would be making multiple meals or components of meals that you are then going to store or freeze. This is really great for soups or chilies, grains like rice or quinoa, sweet potatoes or root vegetables, things like that. Then what you've probably seen in most of your social media would be meals for one. And this is prepping and portioning in single serve containers. And this is a mixture of either batch cooking or making those full make ahead meals, but then putting them in individual serving containers for that week so you can just grab them and go. Then we can look at the most basic form of meal prepping, which is ingredient prep. So this is chopping your veggies, mixing spices, making marinades that you're going to use later in the week. And I think that this is really great because if you've ever meal prepped before, you've maybe noticed that it takes the same amount of time to chop one onion as it does to chop 5 onions. Same thing with making sandwiches. If you have kids or if you're making sandwiches for your lunch, once you get all of the ingredients out, you might as well just be there for an extra minute and prep a few extras instead of doing that every single day and having to get all the ingredients out and put them back. So it's just more functional and you're going to save a little bit more time. So why it's helpful? It is going to save money overall. It's going to save money in the sense of it generally involves a little bit of planning. So you're going to probably go to the grocery store less, which does save you money because you end up buying less things overall because you're not grabbing, those chips that happen to look good today or whatever else. You're also hopefully not going to be spending as much time or money out, eating out or taking time away from work to eat out. So that's going to save you time and overall money. Again, another way that it saves time is by chopping 1 onion versus 5. Taking that example again, it's going to take less time to chop those 5 onions as opposed to chopping 1 onion 5 times throughout the week. It is healthier because you'll be able to plan a little bit better. You're not going to let your hanger take the best of you. And you're going to be able to look ahead at what you're eating for that week. And if you make it yourself, it's going to be healthier than probably eating out. And you can also use this as a family activity. Get the kids involved, let them help prep their lunches or dinners that you're going to have for that week. So I think that this is a really helpful tool that can make your life easier if you just spend a little bit of time with some forethought. So some basics of what you need are containers. They don't have to be fancy. I prefer ones with locking lids because this also helps keep out extra oxygen and make sure that food stays fresh and they're not going to tip over in your bag or your purse as you're going to work. But they're not necessary. You can use any sort of Tupperware. You can use whatever mismatched thing that you have laying around the house. You do need a kitchen. If you don't have access to a kitchen or if you have a really small kitchen, maybe you have a friend who's also interested in meal prepping and you can start to see if you guys can come up with a day that's going to work best. Some things that are handy but not required are an Instant Pot or pressure cooker. They're really great for meats and grains. Another thing is that's really handy is a crock pot. That's good for like soups or chilies or things like that. I know a lot of people that are now switching out their crock pots for instant pots because they have some of the same functions. So if you had to choose one, I would choose an instant pot. And another thing that isn't on this list that can be really handy is some sort of lunchbox that has some ice packs in it so you can keep your food cool if you don't have access to a refrigerator during the day. So let's talk about how we need to think about meal planning. So first of all, you need to take a little bit of time. I generally tell people to do it on a day off or before the day that they're going to shop, that you need to sit down and plan your week. You need to think about what events you have going on, whether you have lunch meetings or say you're planning for a night or two out during the week, and just sit down and kind of think about and forecast what's coming up in your week. And then you also should think about what sounds good. I know one of my clients, she would make salads all the time, but she absolutely hated them. And so we started incorporating other things for her to eat that didn't take necessarily more time, but they were more delicious, so she was more interested in them. So try to figure out how many meals you're going to need, and then again, what's going to be delicious. Not every meal has to be a culinary experience, but it should at least taste good. Then what you need to do once you've figured out how many meals you'll be making and what you need to be planning for is you need to make a shopping list. That's going to involve all of the ingredients that you need to get from the store or that you need to also just think about maybe refilling from your pantry. Again, the shopping list is going to be really helpful because it gives you direction in saving time so you don't forget anything. So you're going to save time by not going to the store multiple times. And it's also going to help you save some money because generally, if you have a shopping list, you won't buy a lot of other things that aren't on that list. Next thing, you need to shop your pantry. Do you need to refill on any spices or oils or little things like oats or things like that that you typically have and maybe wouldn't buy on a weekly basis, but just you want to double check. The next thing you do is you need to go shopping. And then you come home and you start prepping. Once people have a few weeks under their belt, I tell them to start creating a list of go-to meals, things that are generally easy, that you enjoy, and that you can keep on rotation. So one time I had a girlfriend and I saw her sitting with about 10 cookbooks in front of her. I was like, what are you doing? And she was like, I'm meal prepping. Or I'm meal planning. And I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense because if you recreate the wheel every single time, it's going to be a lot harder to project how much food you need. It's also going to feel like you're basically making a new meal every time because you are. So once you start to make these meals more frequently and consistently, the more you'll become efficient with it and understand exactly how much foods you need for those meals. So this is a really great thing to think about when you're looking at meals. So there's on the left side is the things you should make beforehand. And then on the right side are things that you should maybe either prep or package that day. So things you can make before are meat, grains, potatoes or hearty vegetables, soups, beans, sauces and dips. If you want to get really fancy, you can make your own, or you can just package them and pre-package them. And then eggs, like boiled eggs or a frittata with veggies. Things that you want to make day of, or maybe package day of would be crunchy things like crackers or something. They're not going to do well in the fridge. They'll get soggy. So if it's crackers or chips or something like that, generally better to either pre-package those and just leave them out in the pantry and grab them that day, or just pack them up that day. Other things are going to be like soft fruits like berries. If you are going to pre-pack those, I recommend putting a either towel, whether it's paper towel or cloth towel, in the Tupperware that you're going to be transporting them in. They do better in a Tupperware so they don't get squished in a Ziploc bag, but that towel will help absorb any moisture that will cause them to rot sooner or not be as fresh. The next thing is watery vegetables. Again, water is not your friend when it comes to meal prepping. So watery vegetables would be things like cucumbers or tomatoes, and the more that you prep them or cut them, the less they're going to stand up unless you have some sort of acid or something on them. So cucumbers don't do well for more than 2 to 3 days in the fridge. They will definitely rot. So know that those are some things that you either keep the skin on and chop them very minimally, or you just chop them that morning. The next thing is other little snacks like nuts or things like that. And then the last thing is avocados or things that are going to turn brown. No one really likes a brown avocado, so I tell people to generally prep those and slice that up the morning of. All right, I think it's really important when we're talking about meal prepping is to think about food safety. Food safety is really important. The more you practice good food safety practices, the fresher your food's going to stay and the less likely it is to rot or grow harmful bacteria. So ground meats and poultry, so that includes turkey and chicken and any other sort of bird or ground turkey or ground pork or ground beef, always should be cooked to an internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit. That'll make sure that it's killing off any of the harmful bacteria that could be already on that food, so something like salmonella or something like that. So it's going to, that 165 will make sure that that salmonella is killed off and will make sure that it won't continue growing as you store it. Cold food should be kept cold. They should be kept between like 32, 33, 32 is freezing, so about 33 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Because if they're not, basically the danger zone is anything above 40 degrees to 145 degrees Fahrenheit. That's where bacteria grows its best, and especially if you're storing food for multiple days, it's going to grow faster and better. So make sure that you are cooking your meats to temperatures that you need to, or any of your cooked foods, that you're cooling them properly. So don't just stick really piping hot things in the fridge. Let them cool on the counter for a little bit and then put them in the fridge. And then also you want to keep your cold foods cold. So that's where it is handy to have a lunchbox that may have ice packs or something like that in it. The next thing is make sure you're washing your hands in between touching meats and fresh foods, any sort of quote unquote ready to eat food. So that could be like if you're going to eat fresh veggies, or if you have a salad or fruits or nuts or things like that, make sure your hands are clean. Make sure you didn't just touch raw meat as you're packaging those things. I also like to keep my vegetable boards, cutting boards, and knives and things like that separate, or make sure that you are washing them in between, using them with either meat or a vegetable or fresh food that you're not going to cook to that 165 degrees. Also, when you're batch prepping or batch storing, it can be really good to keep certain foods together. So with rice or grain, just keep that together and you can scoop it out that morning. Because if there's excess water being stored with that, then it's not going to last as long. So if you're cooking a bunch of chicken, just store that together in the fridge and you can assemble it that day. That being said, if you are doing those fully prepped single-serve meals, it's not a bad thing to necessarily have them all in one container, but you want all of the things to generally be dry, which means you want to store any dressings or sauces in a separate container. And most foods will last about 3 to 5 days, sometimes even 7 days, if prepared and stored properly. So when we're thinking about composition of meals, this is what we need to think about. If it's going to be plant-based, something that I call kind of like the basic is you want to have a protein, some sort of grain or carbohydrate, and then a vegetable. You then, if you're looking more plant-based, you want to have a legume, which would be like black beans or pinto beans or lentils, some sort of grain, and a vegetable. If you're going more of the low carb route, which I don't necessarily recommend, but if you're just making a meal that you want to be a little bit lower carb, it can be protein and a vegetable and a vegetable. When we're looking at proteins, here's a list of meat-based proteins versus vegetarian-based proteins. So you could have, for a meat-based, it could be any sort of chicken, ground turkey, or beef, fish, or shrimp. Fish and shrimp aren't going to last as long as ground turkey or beef. They will generally last that 3 to 4 days. They probably won't last anywhere 5 to 7. Hard-boiled eggs are really great things to boil beforehand. Greek yogurt, pre-portioning that, or just having the pre-portioned cups. Packing some protein powder with you can be a really great thing for emergencies, or cheese. Vegetarian things would be like beans or lentils, tofu or tempeh, or some of your meat alternatives. Again, you can also use a plant-based or a vegan protein powder. Carbohydrates, when we're looking at those carbs or starches, or those grains, we can look here at this whole list where you have quinoa, rice, which would be brown rice or jasmine or black or wild, any sort of potatoes, whether those are white or sweet. Whole grain pastas are really great, or even some of the gluten-free based pastas like a lentil pasta is really awesome, especially if you're more plant-based and going that route, because you can use that as your protein source as well. Oats can be gluten-free as well. Whole grain bread is a really great option, and then beans are a really great option for a carb as well. So I've gone through in here and listed things that are gluten-free if you're a celiac or gluten sensitive. If you don't know, let me know. Let's make an appointment and we can figure it out. The next thing is you always want to have a vegetable. Always, always, always. When we're looking at portion sizes, you want to think about 3 to 4 ounces of a protein, 1 to 2 handfuls, which is about a half a cup to a cup of cooked carbohydrates or those starches. And then vegetables, I generally say about 2 handfuls of raw vegetables or 1 cup of cooked vegetables if it's something that's going to cook down a lot. Something like kale, I would say you want 2 handfuls of it raw, but it's going to cook down pretty small to be about a cup. And then when we're looking at, here's like a full example of what a week might look like. So you have your breakfast. Those can be really easy things like overnight oats. You can batch make a frittata ahead of time. A frittata is basically just veggies with some eggs, and then you bake it. It's kind of like a crustless quiche. Really great, really easy. What you can do is you can cut that up into sections, whether it's 4 or 6, depending on how many meals you need to be having with it. And then you can store that, and then it reheats really well in the microwave if you want to take it to work or something like that. Pack your snacks. Snacks are really important. I find people don't always need 2 snacks in a day, but definitely trying to find a lunch or dinner snack, or a snack in between lunch and dinner, can be really helpful to make sure you're not ravenous by the time you get home. Again, making sure your lunches are balanced. And then if you look at the dinners, I normally do something, I get pretty crafty. I generally make our dinners sourced around some sort of protein. So whether that is chicken or tofu or something like that, and I will make that in a bunch of different ways. So first of all, if you see on Monday, what I did was made like a Southwest chicken breast. It has like chili, and sometimes if I'm really lazy, I'll just throw some salsa with it and marinate it in that, and then I will either pan sear it or throw it on the grill. I'll serve that with a side of like black beans, and then some calabacillas, which are just some like squash. Then what I'll do on Tuesday is with that chicken, I will then either cut that up or shred that up and use that with tacos. Then on Wednesday, I will put that cut up or shredded meat over a salad. I really like using cabbage. Cabbage does really, really well and holds up really well if you're going to prep that ahead of time, because it'll last in your fridge for weeks on end. Again, if you store it correctly. Thursday, I will then take any leftover chicken, and if I don't have that much, I might add some beans to it or some other sort of plant-based protein that's really easy and it's not going to take me a lot of time to cook. I'll normally use canned beans, and I'll make some sort of soup with it with whatever veggies I need to use up for the rest of the week. And then Friday, or normally one day during the week, I'll spend a night out, whether that's with friends or something like that. So this is a really good way to think about sourcing and planning your weeks around some sort of protein source, and then trying to figure out different ways that you can make that. So maybe if you're using ground beef, it could be burgers one night, could be taco meat the next night. It could be something that you're going to put into a stew or make into a pasta sauce, something like that, so that you don't have to, again, reinvent the wheel every single time. And so you're not eating the same thing all the time. I find that a lot of people find it really boring, and I think it's important to find some joy and fun in food. So here's a way without having to totally go crazy and reinvent everything every single night. So here's a few resources. They are clickable. Hopefully you can click them. But Meal Prep on Fleek is a website. You can just look it up, and they have tons of recipes and great things that can help guide in the meal prepping process. There's some recipes ideas on that link, and then there's a link to containers. Again, my favorite ones that are locking ones. You can get them on Amazon. They also have them at Sam's or Costco. You can find them at Walmart or Target. Anywhere generally. I do prefer glass. You can use plastic. doesn't really matter. And then, if all else fails, I actually own a meal prep company. This is one thing that I do, and this is why I actually made this presentation, so that you had an insight into what goes into all of these meals. And if for some reason you don't have time or don't want to learn how to cook or how to meal prep, but you don't want to keep on forgetting lunch every day and don't want to spend as much money, this is an option. You can find us on Instagram, you can find us on our website at evolveeats.com, and this is a great way, even if it's just once or twice a week that you don't want to think about cooking lunch or dinner. It's a really awesome way to get a balanced meal that does have plant-based options. Everything is gluten-free and dairy-free, not because it's necessarily healthier, but because we want to make sure that we aren't causing anyone to have any allergic reactions. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and let me know. Thank you for listening, and I hope you're able to take something from this. Have a great day.